Welcome and all American Cartel members, Anons, Facebook friends, Instagram followers, random YouTube viewer. Thanks for joining me. My name is Julio Hawkes and I am the Theorizing Theorist. This guy right here, this lovely man right here at 18 years old is Thomas Schoenberger, and the music you're listening to is of his wonderful, complicated, beautiful mind. Now, Thomas Schoenberger has issued a statement in regards to all this hoopla on Vice and whatnot, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. It's a statement meant just for the cartel members, and hope you guys spread it out and around for us. So let's check that out right now. I'm not going to talk. I'm going to let y'all read it because I feel like it just deserves that much attention. So please put on your reading glasses, and as always, you know the routine. To God be the glory.
And trust me, go look up the cicada thing. Blackbird Bogarts and Michael A. Levine. Those are your two cicada people. Well, those are the ones that at least own it. Thomas doesn't get to own the trademark. Although he's trying to lie to everybody and say that he's going to get it. Just going to look at you, Blackbird, and say, if you give him that trademark, I'm going to stop at nothing in the entire world to ruin your life, your family's life, your husband's life and anyone that's ever been known to you ever, Beth. Like I said, if you ever think about it, even attempt it, to give that thing to him, it's all over. And that's it.
Hi, Adam.
Hi, Bayan. It's Bayan, right?
Oh, Bayan, that's right. Sorry, I think this might actually be Lee.
Well, we're early anyway, so a few minutes. So you can take the call.
Hey, Lee. Is this Lee? Oh, no. Guess not.
Wait, I'll call Lee and have him call you. What?
Yeah. What kind of mic is that? Is that one of the new Shure guys?
Yeah. Yeah, this was such a nice space saver. I have a very small desk here. It's almost Trump sized. You remember that little desk?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'm just sort of processing. I don't know if you were watching the coverage today in the Senate, but I was just kind of
the impeachment trial.
What's that?
The second impeachment trial.
Yeah. So it was a bizarre kind of day, but I enjoyed watching your series, and jotted some thoughts too. Let me just make sure. It's on Vice TV, right? But most people watching it online, I assume, right?
Yeah, so there's 3 episodes total. There's one that's like kind of publicly available on YouTube, and then 2 that you can watch on Vice, or 2 and 3 that you can watch on Vice TV or via their app.
Nice, right. That makes sense. So it's episode 1 is a gift/teaser. If you like what you saw, watch the rest.
If you want to go deeper down the rabbit hole to know like really the who and the why.
Well, I think I think though that term rabbit hole might be used. I don't know. I didn't do a count. I don't have the capacity to do a word count, but that term comes up a lot because it's when you're going after a story like this, right? That's what it is, right?
It's 100% like that. And so much of the terminology has been built around like pop culture references from The Matrix or Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
You know, the history of film that they pull from is really robust, and I think that's like what's fun coming at it from a filmmaker is you recognize all of these like pop culture references from films like The Last of the Mohicans or The Matrix or all of these things.
Well,
so, yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that too, because last night or the night before, I watched The Glitch in the Matrix. Have you had it? I don't want to. We're going to talk about QAnon. There's Lee.
There's Lee. Yeah.
Lee, are you going to hang out on here and just? We got here a little early, hit the ground running.
No worries. I'll just listen. All good.
All right, I'm going to hide you, but
sorry.
No offense. No, don't be silly. There we go. We're going to talk about QAnon, the search for Q, which is what we started talking about. But but what you just brought up was it's right on the nose because I just watched this documentary by Rodney Asher. I don't know. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I heard the title. I haven't got to watch it yet.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. He's the one that did that movie about Kubrick and The Shining and all the messaging and symbology and the symbolism.
There you go. That's it. Yeah.
That exists in the in that film. So it's really just kind of disturbing. But it's all about exactly what you said. It's like it also deals with conspiracy, people that are sort of buy into this idea, this, and it's really at the end of the day, kind of what I take away from your 3-part series, docuseries, which also I feel is like how you, without a spoiler, but I kind of feel like that's at the end of the day, it's like, well, why are people seeking this out, regardless of who Q is, regardless of, who's behind the curtain, pulling the levers. It's almost like, almost beside the point. I mean, it's one has to deal with it very well as well too. But like to get to the next place, we kind of do need to know why all these millions of people are desperately grabbing onto this thing.
I mean, exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself, where it really, for me, what the opportunity was in telling this story and what nobody really seemed to be doing was taking that perspective of not trying to have like an intermediary say what the followers believe, like an Anderson Cooper on the news explain to you what the followers believe, but just talking to a follower in like a genuine conversational way about what drew them to QAnon, right? The first interview we do is someone who is a former Bernie supporter who then, went Trump after 16. And I thought, nobody was exploring that narrative in any in any meaningful way that didn't seem kind of intent on ridicule or making fun of the followers. And for me, like, I think that's a natural response as a society when we're confronted with beliefs that are so outrageous, right? Like we want to laugh them off or like act like if we kind of make a few jokes,
dismiss them in a way.
That it's going to go away. But we saw with QAnon over the course of 2 years that it only grew more and more popular over those years, and those kind of tactics of ridicule and dismissing were only being used against kind of the media and the government to attract more and more people and prey on that sense of disenfranchisement that we kind of get at.
So just so people understand, again, the name of the docuseries is called QAnon, the Search for Q, and the structure of the 3-part series is, yours and your co-host, Marley Clements, your partnership in kind of trying to figure out who Q is and the origins thereof and who's really, but getting to the bigger story is really what's going on. And
to just like build.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, to build on that point, I think like for us, again, like not being journalists is like a very controversial idea, but I think like for your audience as filmmakers, really understanding that our perspective was to have a journey and an experience, right? Like, which I think is very much
like our avatar in a way, as like avatars.
No, more like just, what the impetus of the documentary was really, again, like, what is it like to investigate these questions, as much as it was getting to the bottom of, who is QAnon and why does it exist, but like really play to that sense of like us as average, people, not with a journalism degree, not like being, reporters, but just humans trying to understand something. And I think that's a really important distinction. What makes our documentary unique in that sense was we weren't trying to really be prescriptive in what the audience should take away from these conversations, but rather, again, just like an impartial, non-prescriptive way of, talking to QAnon believers.
And you mentioned before, some are kind of loony, or that's our image of some of these people, and yet many of these people are very reasonable, rational sounding, and some of the ones that kind of appear that way are sometimes the looniest, or the most complicated, so. And also something I just didn't know was that the members of this, group have really gone beyond party lines, right?
Yes, I think that's a really important development that was happening a lot more during the pandemic, when things like #SaveOurChildren started to come to the forefront or have like this viral moment. And that drew a lot of people who were like part of the anti-vax community or maybe the New Age community to join, whether they knew it or not, kind of that QAnon family tree of conspiratorial thinking that during the pandemic also spread out to include kind of COVID denial And QAnon very early, you know, in March, in February, March, was putting out documentaries or promoting documentaries like Plandemic and Out of Shadows and Fall of Cabal, which invited a whole new audience that were from sometimes traditionally left-wing or far left-wing circles to join the Q train.
Um, I mean, there's quite a leap from being skeptical about the vaccine, which is a brand new technology, or you know, it's an unproven technology, or whatever you want to call it, to believing that Barack Obama drank baby blood. You know, is it? I mean, was it your sense? You guys, was it your sense that fear? This was principally fear driven.
I think it's prejudice driven. I think that I see QAnon as kind of like this information highway, and there are various on ramps to get into QAnon, whether you know QAnon is behind that on ramp or not, right? And that might be, you know, a bias towards anti-abortion that leads you to like a you know, Save Our Children march, which then leads you to QAnon, right? It might be a more racially driven prejudice that leads you to believe that Michelle Obama is a man, or be susceptible to believing that because it kind of confirms a deeply held suspicion or belief that we have. Or a more, you know, recent example that, you know, there's a elite group of people who are controlling society and culture, and therefore they are, you know, having these ceremonies and meetings where they're planning the world's, you know, events.
Yeah,
and,
right.
and so I think, you know, it is understanding that level of nuance that's really hard to get across, you know, in today's media environment, that I don't think most people who kind of like ended up being Q's most passionate followers knew in the beginning that they were going to be following QAnon or be part of this kind of larger movement. I think QAnon was able to target and message different communities in a way that, you know, that played on those prejudices and those beliefs.
Well, right. Yeah. And the leader of the country was doing that as well, right? So it's like a perfect storm in the sense that you had, on one hand, this pandemic, and then you also had an incredible divide in the country at this particular moment, which is fueling a lot of emotion. And then you have like a Trump who is saying, "Oh, it's perfectly okay. Embrace your, you know, who you are and your prejudices, and you know, it's perfectly okay to be that way. It's perfectly, you know, don't let people make you feel that you shouldn't be that way."
Right.
You know?
And it was exactly, it's, I think that kind of like disabandonment or disconnection with like our humanity, right? And having that conspirator in chief to validate these kind of like worst impulses, that made QAnon kind of uniquely positioned to become so much bigger than anything that America has ever seen before, in terms of like a movement of people that were all radicalized online, you know, and these were things that we saw happening in the Middle East. They were things we saw happening in South America, but only by having kind of Trump's presence in the White House did America then also become susceptible to that same playbook.
And it's like most things, having a sense of community is just feels good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
But it's weird because you just don't get a sense of like who's kind of organizing. I you know, did you feel like you got a sense of that by those? I could add in the structure of these 3 episodes that you kind of do the pyramid approach, in the sense that you start talking to people that seem to be the most involved and visible and mentioned. Like, you know, you have this kind of almost filtering process where the certain names keep coming up, right? So you find them and you talk to them to kind of figure out who's at the very top of this thing.
Exactly. We wanted to kind of like move up the ladder of influence as it kind of related to the QAnon community. And I think you kind of like, and it was really organic too, like what you saw of us putting together, you know, what we were seeing and hearing on the ground from Q followers and people who are anti-Q, looking and asking questions. And I think where we land in the end is really worth considering, you know, because these, what we were able to find and talk to is like, there are actual former members of the intelligence community, actual former members of the military who are subsumed in this. Now, there's a
I mean,
conversation.
and ranking.
Yes. Yeah. And current members. And I think there's so many questions still about like the way that January 6th was organized that have to do with, you know, members, high ranking members in this community. And I think like there's still a question about when certain, you know, members of the military community got involved, but there is no doubt that after a certain point, their support was public and they were actively co-opting the community towards, you know, either their personal or ideological interests. And
Yeah.
it's complicated to talk about because it lends a level of credibility that the Anons have felt for years. But in our effort to kind of discredit and ridicule, nobody thought to ask those questions in a serious way and bring those up. And so that for me was the end of saying like, hey guys, like, again, not a journalist, you know, but it's worth investigating. And the New York Times did a article yesterday.
Yeah, I
that
read
went
it.
deeper into these questions. So we were just, again, like on that front, proud to be moving forward the conversation beyond ridicule and more into like, what are we going to do about this?
Right, you got to get there. It's again, there's an interesting dichotomy in this project where you have this investigative sort of, I understand, citizen journalism approach and like a mystery to be solved, and that's kind of the structure. And then you have this, which is really a MacGuffin, right, as Hitchcock would have called it. In other words, it's really beside the point. What we're getting at is exactly what we were talking about, which is to not point fingers so much or lay blame so much as to figure out, you know, what are we going to do, you know. And what you've mentioned a few times that you're not journalists, you're filmmaker, correct?
Correct.
That's your background. And what is Marley's? And I mean, also, this is a second, I guess, question maybe, but the first one being, how did you guys get together and end up making this project? And then the other thing is, you were still perceived, I assume, because you had a crew. And like, there's a guy at one point who says, you're going to end up in a meme tomorrow, when you're talking to the young blonde woman who was like a spokesperson. And so like, you were perceived as being journalists by some right percentage of the people that you approached, I assume.
Yeah, I think it's important to like understand and respect what journalists are, like, first and foremost, right? Like, there's a process in which journalists follow that earns them the title of being a journalist and like an education. And I have the education of being a filmmaker and a storyteller, right? Like, to get to the heart of a matter in a way that I think, journalists have a different set of tools to do. And us as storytellers, us as filmmakers, were really driving at the idea of like having more questions than answers, right? And being comfortable with that. And that kind of process of like finding and discovering truth. And so I think, Marley has a background of being involved in kind of politics and campaigns in politics. And my background was always in filmmaking. And so I think that was where we were able to kind of meet in the middle and recognize that both of our respective fields are kind of changing as a result of the political landscape. And I think we were both driven by different curiosities, but ultimately I think that we represent so much of different perspectives that I see every day, that people have. So I really liked that partnership, that we were able to kind of decompress and bring our shared knowledge to every question we were looking at.
Yeah, you make me think that, journalism is in a, um, or maybe, what people perceive as being journalism is a, it's a, it's a, it's a little tricky right now. It's a little confusing because, people, as we know, get a lot of their information from social media. Some of the highest rated news programming, as we call it, is actually our opinion shows by entertainers, right? On MSNBC or CNN, that kind of thing, Fox. So it's very, yeah, it's very interesting a topic as to kind of explore.
It was something that I kept noticing over and over again as we would film, is people being like, "Oh, these guys are reporters." Oh,
Yeah,
these guys. And I was just, it was interesting to me because we always represent as like, "Hey, I'm the filmmaker." That has a specific meaning to me. But I kind of see how there's this merger now of like journalism and documentary. And I
sure.
think like that was something that in this process I don't think I anticipated or I expected. But I think as filmmakers, as people who are listening, can kind of like start to see, is noticing what those differences are, right? Like why our show was successful in a way that, like, I think folks who are looking at it from a journalistic perspective weren't able to tackle. And that's why documentary is so important today, because it's not about, where with journalism, that practice goes through, many rounds of fact checking and making sure that like everybody is saying the right things. Whereas documentary, we can make space for people to say the wrong things and understand that and think about that. And I think that is a really important art form today for people to continue doing, is just, go out there and have an experience as a filmmaker, go out there seeking to understand something, and not worrying, I guess, so much about like, um is everybody going to be okay with like what I might find or the conversations I have, because like we must reinstill like the humanity in documentary or filmmaking, and those kind of things, and nuance to that, rather than telling people like this is what you need to believe, right? Like let us kind of prescribe to you um how you should feel about any certain thing. That's why I love documentaries.
Yeah, well, you tell a good story in this one. And we're as Vice Media is a producer, what are their, what's their hand? Do they have a hand in it? How branded do they want you guys, or how present are they there and
Yeah.
hands
Well,
on?
yeah, we were really blessed to work with Danny Gabai at Vice Studios
Hmm.
as one of our early partners in helping us shape this. And the studios team has come out with, just, I want to say, like some of my favorite documentaries in the last few years. I think Vice has a tone and approach that, as a millennial, an average millennial, I always grew up appreciating. And because it kind of leaned into exactly what I was just mentioning, where it's this kind of accessible form of documentary where there's nobody like holier than thou like explaining it to you, but rather like people like me or someone else just going out there and asking questions. So Vice really kind of created the sandbox that allowed us to kind of explore those questions in a way that I don't think a lot of traditional networks would let us. And so that was, I think, what that relationship was like, was understanding at the outset that this was something that we would need to continue having a conversation about, like, what is the line, right, that we're willing to go to, where we still feel like we're um, communicating what is important about this ideology, not being prescriptive, but also not being irresponsible, and trying our best to stick to the things that manifested themselves in some kind of offline harm or organization or, you know, ideology. Yeah.
Well, we're talking to Bayan Junam, who is, they get that right? I just want to make sure.
Junam, yeah.
Junam. Junam?
Yeah, perfect.
Yep. Who is director? You're sole director, right? Even though Marley's kind of co-hosting or
Yeah, I would say co-creator.
co-creator.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so you are the co-creator of QAnon, the Search for Q, currently available to watch on Vice TV, and again, it's such a timely. You must have this must have come together relatively quickly. Another probably scary but also liberating experience.
Yeah. First day of production was August 10th, where we went to Georgia for Marjorie Taylor Greene's election,
Yeah,
the
right.
special election. Actually, it didn't make it into the final cut, but we were there when Marjorie was elected. So top to bottom, like, yeah, 6 months to make those 3 hours, which is super fast. Not to mention during the pandemic, which made everything a little harder. But you know, I think that we recognize the importance of putting it out quickly, you know, needing to have it come out at a time where people were still trying to decompress and understand what's happened the last few years.
Yeah. Do you think it might recruit anybody? I don't think so, but you never know.
I don't think so. I trust the audience. We had a lot of conversations about that internally, you know. What is that line, right, between like not wanting to create a platform for this ideology, but rather be able to hear what it really is from the people who believe it. And so I think when I look at the range of content out there, I think we do the best job at it because we allow Anons to speak for themselves. We maintain a certain level of civility throughout, which is something that we wanted to demonstrate, you know. And then we made sure to debunk the things that have led to offline harm.
Right.
And some of those beliefs that we disagreed with were more apparent on our face than others. But
sure,
I think until we actually confront the beliefs, we're never going to move on. We're never going to have the tools to address them until we can really see them.
Last question. Have any of your subjects in this docuseries gotten back to you having seen it and given you any feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an ongoing conversation that I've had with a number of people in the doc.
Do they feel they're fairly treated or represented, or
some yes and some not as much? You know, I think that it's typical, I think, in a documentary that isn't a puff piece, that people might not feel as like proud of things that they've said, you know, while the camera was rolling. But I think, again, like one of the things I always point back to is when you look at the landscape of stuff that has been made, I still think we did the most fair job of handling these conversations and not taking kind of cheap shots at people or like trying to create a situation where like there's a winner and a loser in a conversation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think everybody felt, at least from the, you know, from a human to human level, that we, during that conversation, respected them, were open-minded, and like, you know, were interested in having a conversation. And I think after watching it within the context of what happened on January 6th, it was a very different tone after that point. So I think that nobody could have foreseen that. I mean, we did, but most people, you know, we had a camera out there, but I think most people didn't see it coming to that point. And when we were talking to people, it was still very much a conversation about like, is this dangerous? Is this not dangerous? I think that the tone around that changed a lot after the 6th.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were distancing. A lot of people have been distancing themselves since.
I bet that would make sense. There have to, yeah, people are getting arrested. Also, maybe there's a sense of protection, you know, to
And
protect,
I would say that people, on the positive side, through the conversations I've been able to have on camera and off camera, I think people were able to see a little bit more clearly what happened, right? Like this was gamification, right? This created investment on a little by little basis, on a breadcrumb by breadcrumb basis that people were subsumed in, right? Like it created a filter over reality that people were really invested in. And I think we're only, GameStop did that again in a way. It was able to co-opt that same enthusiasm from anonymous message boards into real world effects that had varying degrees of caused various degrees of instability.
right.
With it. And so I think we should all look at that and not think like, oh, those people over there fell for it, but these things can happen to you. They could happen to me. It just is a matter of finding the right prejudice to, and
Right. And it happened with the election.
right.
Like you could just deny that what happened just enough. And there must be a sense of empowerment, being able to successfully do that. Bayan Junam sounds.
Bayan Junam. Yeah.
Say it again.
Bayan Junam.
Okay, Bayan Junam.
Nailed it.
Close enough. I mean, I'm sorry. I try to really make an effort to get it right too. I should have done a little bit more.
I appreciate that, Adam. I do.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice of you. Nice to talk to you, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again sometime. I look forward to it.
Yeah, big fan of your show. So thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you. All right, talk to you soon. Stay safe, and
will do. You too.
All right, take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Lee.
Yep,
Take
and
care,
thank you,
guys.
Bayan.